Well, this is the market town of Malton in North Yorkshire, self-styled food capital of the county. Here in this square, markets have been held for centuries. Just a few hundred yards from here is a livestock market where farmers bring their animals to sell, usually about once a month. It was food production and a common agricultural policy that were at the foundation of an argument for a European economic community going right back to the Treaty of Rome in 1957. Now, I'm 64 years old, and that makes me one of the youngest British citizens to have been able to vote in the first referendum on the EEC in 1975. The whole thrust of the argument at that time was about commerce and trade, food prices, a common market, and also figuring in people's minds was the fact that some 30 years after the end of the Second World War, we wanted continued peace in Europe. That was vital to the interests of the nation. Now, if at the time we'd been told that there was a subplot, a hidden agenda, if you like, to create a European superstate in which Britain would be relegated to little more than the status of a province within a United States of Europe, we would never have voted for entry. There is no question that the people would not have voted to lose that level of sovereignty. I was born here in Yorkshire. My father was an Allied soldier, a Pole, who came here towards the end of the war, decided to stay. Many of these soldiers were allowed to settle in Britain because they'd fought so hard for the Allied cause. And he met my Yorkshire-born mother. The early 1950s was a period of austerity in Britain, and indeed there was rationing in the early years, but it was a period of great optimism. Britain was trying very hard to build a better future for the next generation, and there was a serious determination never to allow a conflict to arise in Europe again. Over the past 70 years, Britain has accepted migrants from many different parts of the world: Afro-Caribbeans, Asians, and Eastern Europeans like my father. And they came here with one thing in common. They all wanted to work hard and settle and raise families in a country whose values and freedoms and prosperity they admired and wanted to be part of. It's a matter of indisputable historical fact that those values and freedoms which we enjoy in this nation were based on the Judeo-Christian faith of our ancestors. Many of our household name great companies, our institutions, charities, our system of law and order and government were all based on that faith. Our ability to exercise our democratic right to change governments and to change policies has been the safety valve which kept Britain from the bloody revolution which happened elsewhere in Europe. I was privileged to be born in an era when free, high-quality education to grammar school and university level, as well as healthcare from the cradle to the grave, were the right of every British citizen. I understand the history and the sacrifices that were made so that my generation and those that would follow would continue to enjoy these wonderful rights and privileges. Sadly, in these more educationally deprived times, the young are less likely to understand the history. Many don't realise just how perilously close we are to losing our democratic birthright. The late and much misunderstood MP Enoch Powell, made infamous by his 1968 Rivers of Blood speech, was in fact one of the finest politicians of his day. Enoch Powell spoke 12 languages, spoke Latin by the age of 5, was the youngest ever professor in British history and the youngest brigadier in the army. He made this prophetic warning to the nation back in December 1976.
The British people are about to have practiced upon them a trick even cruder and more shameless than that by which they were cheated out of their inheritance of parliamentary self-government in the first place when we acceded to the European Economic Community. However, since the trick is basically the same one over again, it is to be hoped that the people will not be taken in twice, but will listen to those who warned them correctly before.
He was the first Eurosceptic. He was the first person who saw the European Union not as a common market, but as a political project. And in the general election of February 1974, he said he would not stand as a candidate in the election. And nobody could quite believe that a man who was not very far away perhaps from becoming a Prime Minister at one point wouldn't stand in the election. And he, 2 days before the general election, booked the City Hall in Birmingham, his home city, and gave a speech at which he said he urged British voters to vote for the Labour Party. Now, my parents just simply couldn't believe this. You know, how could the buttoned-up Conservative brigadier, you know, the darling of the right of British politics, advocate voting for a socialist party? But the reason was that the socialists said we could have a referendum on our common market membership. So a very highly principled man. And there was an amazing moment in that speech when somebody at the back of the room shouted at Powell, "Judas!" And he stared at the man and he pointed. He said, "No, Judas was paid. I'm making a sacrifice." How about that?
The succeeding 4 decades have seen a continuing loss of sovereignty for Britain, particularly following the Maastricht and Lisbon treaties. A written constitution for the European Union had been planned as far back as 2004. Britain abandoned the idea of a vote on it after both France and the Netherlands rejected that constitution in 2 referendums. 2 years later, most of the constitution's provisions were resurrected in the Lisbon Treaty, a document which was as much of a threat to national sovereignty as the old text would have been. In one of his first major decisions as Prime Minister, Gordon Brown broke Mr Blair's promise to hold a referendum on the new treaty. Ireland voted no, by 53% to 47%. Almost as soon as the Irish ballots were counted, their rejection of Lisbon was treated as the wrong answer. The cynical European political elite forced a second referendum on an Ireland still reeling from the fallout of the 2008 financial crisis so that they would come up with the right answer. Does that sound familiar?
Nigel and I agree on hardly anything at all. But we do agree at least on one thing, and it happens to be the most important thing, not only now, but in the lifetime of everyone in this hall and everyone in this country. It is the demand that Britain should be an independent, sovereign and democratic country, and that means leaving the European Union.
The last thing they have the slightest intention of doing is to permit Britain to resume her position as a world buyer and, incidentally, a world supplier. It is a question of the national existence and independence of Britain itself. The whole business of food prices and the common agricultural policy is a symbol and a specimen of the degradation of Britain from a nation to a province. We were threatened that we could not feed ourselves unless we gave up our freedom. The lesson which has been taught to the British electorate since it made its grave but recoverable mistake is that in small things and in great things alike, there is no future for the British people which they will find tolerable, except as a sovereign, self-governing nation-state.
So what question did you want to ask me?
What are you doing?
What am I doing? I'm making a programme about Brexit and about the choice that your parents and your grandparents are making about Britain's future, which is your future and the future of the children you'll have. And I'm amongst a group of people who believe that the decision that we make now is probably a once and for all decision which will affect you and the kind of country that you live in when you're as old as me. That's what this is about.
We could have expected them to be honourable and slightly better than that, couldn't we?
Well, one of the comments that I made in this little film is that it is our ability as a sort of in a democratic country, our ability to vote out a government and vote in new policies that have kept Britain from bloody revolution over the last few hundred years. And this is probably one of the most, it's a kind of light the blue touch paper
I'm
moment.
absolutely with you.
And I can imagine
I am so
how yeah, in fact, I've met middle-aged people, ladies who are, you know, really sort of quiet and gentle, who are more angry about this than anything that's happened in our nation in the whole of their lifetime. And, you know, they can you imagine if we just voted in Labour and suddenly there was a 2 million strong petition to have the Conservatives back in, and the government said, well, we better have a rethink then, or maybe a best of three. It would be anarchy. Anyway, thank you for your question. You won't be on ITN News tonight, so don't worry. The Brexit vote of June 2016 was the biggest vote for anything in Britain's history. More than 17 million people voted an unequivocal no. 73% of Britain's elected MPs, however, were Remainers. In an orchestrated 2-year-long fear and misinformation campaign, our government, ably assisted by unelected EU commissioners and officials, have conspired together to rob the British people of this one opportunity to forge an independent destiny.
Can anyone but a fool seriously suppose that if the community, already thus equipped, is endowed with the authority derived from a body which directly represents the total electorate, the elective bodies of the member states will not shrink and shrivel under the spreading shade of a European Parliament, Commission and Council? That, starkly, is the difference between a nation and a province, between self-government and subordination. The choice between them, still open, still free, in no wise morally or legally preempted, is the choice your representatives will shortly be making in Parliament. You still have the power to punish them if you take it otherwise than as you wish, but you must tell them, and tell them now. No politician can restore to a nation a spirit which is lost, or a pride and personality which have departed from it. What politicians can do, if that spirit still exists, and that pride and personality are merely latent and not extinct, is to show the nation when the time to exert itself has arrived, and when the opportunity is present.
Now, the Canadians, who are relatively small on the northern frontiers of the United States, if they were to adopt this argument, would have joined the United States years ago. We have struggled, and we really have struggled for centuries, to win the right to hire and fire our lawmakers. And the day we give up that right and abandon the capacity to learn by our experience through the ballot box, to dismiss a Labour government and get a new government, or a Conservative government and get a new government, the day we do that, we build in an element in our society that I believe will destroy all that is most valuable in Britain. I want to work and cooperate with everybody, but I want to govern myself, and that's the key to it all. The people in Bristol have sent me to Parliament over 25 years, and you, I think, longer from your constituency. And every time they've had the power to dismiss me or to re-elect me, and because of that, I've had to listen to them. Now, the commissioners don't have to listen to the British people because they are immune from the possibility of electoral defeat. Now, on the continent, the traditions of democracy are different from ours. 30 years ago, Germany was under Hitler, Italy under Mussolini. France has had a succession of revolutions and counter-revolutions and coups d'etat. We, for many centuries, have fought for the right to give the ultimate power to our own people. Now, nobody can pretend, least of all you, because I know you have an idea of a political union, that's part of the European idea, can really argue that there isn't a price to be paid for this, and the price, unfortunately, is paid by the electors, whoever they elect in future elections will not be able to change the common agricultural policy, the common regional policy, because that has been adopted by a previous government and cannot be changed by a single nation, whichever government is elected.
Theresa May and her incompetent cohorts have failed to negotiate an orderly and dignified exit from the European Union. It's embarrassing that this once great global trading nation has been made a laughingstock in the international community. A negotiation which you can't walk away from isn't a negotiation at all. What many of us have observed as our hapless Prime Minister shuttles between Westminster and Brussels looks more like capitulation. So what's really going on? The gifted author, broadcaster and political commentator Melanie Phillips says it best. This is nothing less than a titanic clash between civilizations, between opposing worldviews. The first seeks to defend the Western nation based on its discrete and particular history, its culture, language, religion and ethical values which are drawn from the Hebrew Bible and from Christianity. A national identity which is expressed through laws passed by a democratically elected and sovereign parliament. The second wants to destroy all that and replace it with a new world order under which the Western nation is superseded by supranational laws and government, institutions where national borders are erased and biblical morality is replaced by an ideology, specifically identity politics, multiculturalism and moral relativism. Theresa May, the vicar's daughter, seeks a compromise. There cannot be a compromise between these two competing ideologies. Simply put, the one must defeat the other. How pathetic and weak Britain's political leadership now appears. Could you imagine our wartime Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, embarrassing the nation in this way? Securing Brexit, an exit from the European Union, as the majority of the electorate expect, is not about primarily migration, race, or indeed religious issues. It is about taking back the rights and freedoms which were hard won by our ancestors in these islands. That legacy to be passed on undiminished to our children and grandchildren. Whether you voted Leave or Remain, these past 2 years have demonstrated that our self-serving government and political elite are not worthy of the trust of the British electorate. If Brexit is not delivered in a way that leaves Britain independent and free, then the entire political class in this country can expect to reap a whirlwind at the next general election. Indeed, the old two-party system could very well be consigned to the history books. Treachery is defined as betrayal, disloyalty, faithlessness, breach of trust, duplicity, deception, false-heartedness, double-dealing, untrustworthiness. Treason is the crime of showing no loyalty to your country, especially by helping its enemies or trying to overthrow its government.
Delaying Brexit is an attempt to thwart Brexit. The people who are in favour of delay are people who were Remainers in the first place, and it is an effort to override the authority of 17.4 million voters.
It seems rather symbolic that on this last Saturday before March the 29th, as the traders are packing their wares after another day of trading, that the Union Jack over Malton should be hanging limply, faded and tattered. The question that people must answer is whether the supranational political elite, the unelected EU commissioners, the globalists with their tame broadcasters who are laughing behind our backs, are going to overcome the democratic will of our people. As Melanie Phillips says, without Winston Churchill's leadership in the Second World War, Britain would have fallen to the Nazis. But now Britain has no leadership to give its MPs the courage they would need to march away from the pharaohs of Brussels. The people, however, do have that courage. It may take a modern miracle to save Brexit now, and with it, the last slim chance of British participation in the epic battle to save the West. There will not be a more serious question in our lifetime. The answer to that question will shape the future for every British citizen. Our tiny island will once again prove to be the bulwark against which tyranny and enslavement will not prevail. May God save Britain.